Welcome to Equity's Go to the Field podcast. Today we are back in the studio with Jeremy Williams, Alan Walters, and John Babcock. Going to continue to talk about high yields, and this time we're going to be talking about soybeans. So in the previous episode number 7, we talked about corn. We talked about some of the yields that this group has accomplished on the corn side. At the same time, this group has also been very successful in raising high-yielding soybeans. This past year, both of these farms achieved field averages over 105 bushels an acre. That was with Asgrow 36XF4s. So we wanted to take a little bit of time in this episode and cover some of the things that they have found over the years to influence some of those soybean yields. So guys, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having us again.
Thanks for having us.
Again, guys, would you agree, for the most part, the fertility programs that you're running are pretty similar for the most part between your corn and your soybean programs?
Yeah, for sure.
Yep, totally.
So let's start at planting. What does planting look like in these high-yielding soybean fields?
Actually, Eric, before we even get to planting, from what we've seen and learned, it's actually going to start preparing our thoughts of what seed we're going to do and the treatment that goes along with that to obtain these high yields before we even get to planting. So every case, both these guys is going to look at variety placed by field, and then also a very solid fungicide insecticide, also with a product called Saltro, before we even go to the field.
Variety placement, we talked about it in corn, but it is really just as important in soybeans that we're making sure that the varieties that we're planting on a particular acre is a good fit for that acre, whether it be the way the acre sits, the way it drains, how highly productive it is. All of those things matter on soybeans just as much as they do on corn.
Absolutely.
One thing about that, no different than corn, we've been variable rating our fields for a good 4 or 5 years now. We have a lot of yield data on that. With doing that, we've also been able to, on the soybean side of things, take a 3-acre or 5-acre block in the middle of the field, and we'll lower that population down to 110, 115, try to figure out how low we can go and still have maximum yield. And we've done that enough years, we don't try to even study that side of it anymore. We kind of know where we need to be population-wise, but it's also allowed us to lower our populations over the last several years and still maintain the right yield off of the right variety. So there's a lot of things that get done before you ever take the planter to the field to set yourself up for the season.
Where do you guys target your planting population for each year?
For the last 2 years, as a farm median for beans, taking out double crops, we're in that 130, 135. That's an average of 115, 110 to 160.
I agree with that. We're in the same area. One thing that we've learned by dropping the population is not really what you plant, and it's going to be what you get up. And if you are going to plant 110, but you only have a germ of 90%, you're already 10% behind from planting. So we've had to adjust some things off of what the germ scores are, and also on your emergence and how you set it up to achieve your emergence. So just because you can go out there and say, I'm going to drop the population to 110, you kind of need to study it. Like, well, is that really where you need to be at planting, or is that where you want to be at for a final stand, is 110? And it's different for every farm, different for every variety, different for every farmer on how you get there.
And, John talked about that fungicide, insecticide, seed treatment, and I think that's really important, especially when you're talking about dropping these populations down into those low 100,000 seed counts per acre. By putting on some of that protectant on the seed, it allows us to get more of those soybeans we're putting in the ground to actually come up.
And you're wanting to plant early, so you want protection out there for it as well. I mean, you're wanting to push yields.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So, in the corn episode, we talked, and you guys both talked about how you kind of wait a little bit until that May timing to get your corn crop in the ground. But on soybeans, while maybe some of the neighbors are planting corn, you guys are working on soybeans. So what does that look like? Is there a time in April maybe where it's go time in soybeans? Do you wait to a particular point? What does your strategy look like for planting soybeans?
I know the first year we did it, I'm going to say is 19 was our first year with planting beans early. I mean, you're planting with a Carhartt coat. You're thinking, are we right? It's backwards to what you think, what you're used to. And they laid there, come up, looked beautiful, and some of our better beans still this year.
Beans are different than corn as far as how strong and durable they are and what they can take. On our particular farm, what we found for us is I would like to ideally be by April 10th be planting, and I want to be done by April 25th with all of our beans. Completely backwards from what you're going to do on what we do on our corn, because ideally you want those beans flowering by the longest day of the year, June 20th. We found ideally you need to have them there, have them in the ground by April 25th. We've seen them lay there for 3 weeks before they come up, but I will say it seems like when we plant in April compared to where we plant in late May, June, our clay banks have a much better stand than you do it in April than when you do it in May and June, because in May and June your clay banks will be dry and the rest of your field may have water standing in it. But if you get them planted in April, you're getting the right amount of heat, you're getting the right amount of moisture, and we have better consistent stand on clay banks and the rest of the field than if we do it in late May and June.
Belo's group has done a lot of work on this, and I think it's been a couple years ago or that he mentioned every day that you plant after April 23rd, I think you lose a half a bushel per day.
And I think, if I remember right, first plot was starting June 20th on mine.
So moving into the planter pass, what do you guys shoot for on depth of soybeans?
And when we planted in March, we was told to go 1.5 inches, so that's where we set it. Kind of questioned it, but I expected a frost to kill them, or not to kill them, but to hurt them. I mean, we never got that frost. We never got it. Most years you'd have a cold snap and all that. I mean, I planted stuff drier in March than I planted in May on beans. I mean, you're planting beans March 29th and dust is rolling. It's a little concerning. I mean, it's just how it went and come up great. Yeah, I mean, just kind of keep them deeper because you don't want them up before frost. That's kind of what we was always told. Don't get them up.
Yeah, we always plan around and target that inch depth. I think it's no different than corn. Kind of figure out where your moisture is, what your forecast looks like going forward, and just do what's comfortable for you. I would like to try planting some at 1.5 inches. It's kind of hard for three of us to get our heads together and see exactly where we need to be depth-wise, but around 1 inch has worked really well for us in the past. I think it's no different to corn. Seems like the deeper you get it, the better it gets emergence for some reason.
After the March beans, we're back, like he said, we're back in 1 inch. We don't just seem like we always thought they're just not usually get a pound of rain and they're done.
What about on maturity group? Are you guys generally in these early planted soybeans, are you targeting a later maturity group bean, or are you putting your highest yielding bean genetics out in that early planting timing? What is the way you approach that?
This year we had from early to mid to late. I mean, we did everything in April and had basically earlies in late May all the way to mid 3/6. I mean, just kind of is a mix of everything. I mean, they always say that later numbers should go first to give them more time.
We had a mixed bag as well. We had some 3-1s, clear up to some 4s. I think we just tried to place them for your efficiency around harvest as to where the combine's going to be in reference to where your farm is. Some of the varieties get placed depending on the way the ground is. So you kind of have some tougher beans, it's going to go on tougher acres. You're going to get the highest yield with that type of bean. So I don't know that we concentrate on everything's a 3.5 and before, or everything's 3.5 and below, or past that. I think we're heavier on the later maturity this year than we have been, just trying to figure out how to correlate bean harvest with corn harvest.
Has there been a sweet spot over the years with maturities and the timing of planting that you guys have had the most success with?
Mid to late 3s. I mean, but some years we've had our 2.9s win if it's the rain. But this year the 3.6s was our best.
I think 2 years ago, I planted on the first and second day we planted in April. I planted our 3.1s, our 3.5s, and our 4.0s. And between all three varieties, there was less than 2 bushel difference between them at harvest. But the way the varieties are now, I don't know, and it depends on your planting date. But we've had success in early April with all varieties.
And I think in the 2024 season, both of these guys, I mean, we're trying to figure out as a whole, what can we do to push these beans up over 100 bushel field averages? So our spread this year of varieties on both farms was as broad as it's ever been. And I mean, they went from the earlier 3s clear into the mid or later group 4s with one variety. And at different times of the year, we probably thought that actually the group 4 beans is going to plant, or they planted. was by far going to achieve the highest yield. It looked like it pretty much all year long, but Mother Nature turned off the spigot on us, and we had all kinds of pods in our later variety, but it kind of seemed like the weather hit us to where more of that mid three was kind of the point that it cut off the best yield at, because we didn't have enough moisture to finish out them later group beans. So that's why you got to plant, a more than one variety or even a couple on your farm, because you just never know what's going to actually be the best. But some years are pretty similar. This year proved out that, thank God, we didn't have everything in that late group 3 or group 4 variety, or it would have cost us some bushels.
Well, and to add to that, where we had those 2 varieties planted, there's a farm lane that splits the fields, planted the same day. Identical soil types, identical fertility. The only difference is really the maturity level of the bean. And we also had some earlier than that planted within the same farm that it was a lot of dependent on rain this year.
So after planting, we're moving to in-season management. What's the first thing that comes to mind once you start entering into the season, the growing season, when that soybeans emerged?
Like the first step's weed control. We try to make it a staple that exactly 21 days from time they're planted, we're making a residual pass to get it out there.
Jeremy, are you putting on a pre-emerge application?
Yep. We'll put it on, and after the planter goes through the field, we'll put it down, and then, like I said, we'll try to be 21 days later, we're coming back with that next pass. And next pass, we have residual. We also have glyphosate or Liberty out there with it too, for whatever's up, and some nutritional and fungicide with it at the same time.
What are you guys using for a pre-emerge chemistry?
It varies for farm on each of them. We're for sure putting down 2 to 3 modes of action that's effective against water hemp, because that is our number one enemy in soybeans. And then, coming back in the post-emergent, we'll have like a group 15 with that also, to just layer that residual in. Mother Nature will guide us a little bit on that, but just like Jeremy had said in the corn episode, the best way to go out there and hit it is when there's very minimal to no weeds really out in the field, because once that, especially water hemp, gets too big, some of our post herbicides, it seems like year to year, is getting weaker and weaker on controlling them. If they're 3-4 inches, you might not get 100% control. So the sooner the better.
What nutritional and what fungicide are you putting in at that time?
Actually, we're just on the fungicide. Through the years of playing with it, we've actually just chose a cheap, like Strobe fungicide that we put in. It's varied in name, just depends on the cost point of what we decide we're going to use.
I think the first year we did that, we found out we could do it for less than $4 an acre.
Yeah.
When we added a generic fungicide, because it was like, well, why haven't we been doing that the whole time? It's
Well,
$4.
and at some point, it's hard to even see if you have a return on investment in that. I think some years you probably don't. But at $3-4 an acre, I mean, you can't even hardly measure that. I mean, that's tenths of a bushel of soybeans. Yeah. So, and then we got a kind of a nutritional we put in. We've utilized Mach 7. We've used some other products, like a Gain of High K, some different things like that for nutritionals.
Well, when we first started that, we found out that was more of a timing, because we've tried those nutritionals later, no different than corn, and it wasn't getting into the bean plant when it needed to be in the bean plant. When we did that timing, it went more towards the fodder than it did towards the seed, it seemed like. So when we first started doing those nutritionals and fungicides, we kind of have moved to where we think we're in a better spot to get the most return on those applications.
Yeah, still for soybeans, the vast majority of our nutrition's got to be out there before the plant's even up. I mean, it's going to be with our either fall or spring application before planting to get most of our base load of fertility out there. It's got to be there for the plant to take advantage of it.
So we've been playing with an in-furrow fungicide as well on beans as well, and been showing very, very good ROI.
Yeah, that product from Bayer called ProLine. Luckily, we've worked with our Bayer rep to actually started working with that a few years ago. I've had several farmers, actually test that. It's been very positive, but everybody's beans, or several people's beans, are in 15-inch rows, so the ability to have in furrow on 15-inch rows is pretty limited right now as far as people's planters. But we started, I think, initially with Allen's, even just using the corn planter rows with that's the only thing I had in furrow and testing it then. And like the results we'd seen as far as return on investment, and continuing to play with that quite a bit, but still having that ability to have liquid on your soybean planter is most people's breaking point there because they don't have that.
I know a lot of people probably won't agree with this statement, and that's fine. But I think you can take a bean, whether it's an Extend Flex bean or an Enlist bean or just a straight Liberty bean, and you have the right nutrition out there at the right time and the right management, you can succeed with high yields on any variety that you have out there. It doesn't have to be an Extend Max. It doesn't have to be an Enlist. I think that it's all about trying to get that nutrition into the plant at the right time and maximizing your efficiency on everything. And then some people's opinions are probably, Enlist is more stellar than Extend. Some people's Extends more than Enlist. In our situation, we've been more heavily towards the Extend side because we can manage our applications on chemicals by owning our own sprayer and doing it on our own time, whereas different retailers manage things different for their sprayers if they got to flush out or if they have to hit this field, but this field across the road's a different one. I think you have to figure out what works on your farm and don't judge it that way.
I mean, you're back to what they always call the Liebig's law of return. The staves on the barrel, your yield's only going to be as high as that lowest stave on the barrel. So trying to figure out what the common denominator is in yield. And obviously the variety is going to be a part of that, but not necessarily all of it.
Right.
Right. Depending on, what trait platform you want to go, you're always going to try to pick your highest yielding varieties. It don't matter, the trait platform. It just depends what works for your farm. And then you go from there to manage that product, no matter what the trait is, to try to achieve the highest yield you can.
So after your 21-day post pass, is that the last herbicide pass that you have to make in these beans? Does that keep it clean through canopy?
We try to pick beans that are going to bush out in 15-inch rows. It's easier to canopy than it is 30-inch rows, and that helps suppress the weed pressure.
But we always leave it open because we all know that depending on weather timing, whether some of our residuals are going to get activated or not, you have to be prepared that if there's weeds out there to go tackle that problem. And if that means you're going to spend more money on a third pass, that's what you got to do.
So then what is the next management that these soybeans receive? So you got your weeds are cleaned up. You're going into probably, are you doing anything at R1? Are you waiting till R3 to make a fungicide pass? What's the next step in you guys' management?
Most, I'd say R3 be the next pass.
Yeah, R3 is going to be primarily, we have at times, depending on some products, we've played with some PGRs and stuff in more of that R1 time period. Boy, everything gets really consolidated. You start doing R1 and then you follow up with R3 and it seems like, boy, you never get out of the field. So across most of the farm, it's R3 to where we're out there with some of that, with the fungicide, insecticide, nutritionals, fungicide of choice. Once again, it's going to be more of one of the premium where we use the generic early on. We want one of more of the premium branded fungicides. Take your pick there, depending on what operation or maybe what program you're in. And then use a insecticide that's going to include a neonicotinoid in it for them hard shells. And then add in some nutritional, whether it's a Gainer K or Mach 7, and sometimes we've added in, extra manganese, and like I said, then also some PGRs in with that, like Ascend, and then a biostimulant like Takeoff. That seems to be kind of the mix we're at right now.
I was going to say, all of that, I think you have to look at trying all those things differently to figure out there's some things that won't work alone, that you have to add something else to make it maximize its efficiency in the plant. And we've kind of studied that over the years on different things we've done. We've left stuff out, made a pass without it, marked it down, went to harvest with it. And it's like, well, this did a lot better when we added something else to it. Some of those things do work together and some of them don't, but you kind of got to figure that out on your own.
Right. And you still got to, just like in corn, you got to be in the field. There's times like last year we had to throw an early insecticide in. We had some issues. We had to have another insecticide pass prior to that R3 pass. There's been years that we've went in at R3, and I think we've missed the boat the more we've looked at it. Stink bugs some years have been absolutely terrible even after that. There's no doubt in my mind we could have went in with another insecticide pass, the Leverage 360 and Indigo, something like that, and made money, and probably quite a bit, because a couple of years ago when it seemed like every combine had stink bugs crawling all over them, there's no doubt we lost bushels.
And with that being said, we don't just make a program and stick with it either, because it's like, well, if you don't need it, don't waste the insecticide or whatever it have you. You gotta be out there, like John said, out there looking at it all the time and adjusting to what you're gonna do, because you don't just make this program up in February and you stick with it when you may not need it, or you may need to adjust to something else that'll cover that. I think that when we first started doing fungicide and insecticide on beans, we concentrated more on our double crop beans in the beginning and didn't realize it was the insecticide part that was gaining the most yield from the grasshoppers and bugs like that eating your foliage in late August, when the rest of your beans are starting to mature and shut down. The double crop beans are thriving, and that's where the insects went to. So we had more success with the insecticide side of things and didn't realize it in double crops until we kind of studied it. Like, well, this is why it worked. I mean, the fungicide did help, but I think the insecticide did more for us in the double crops than the fungicide did.
That and all these soybeans, I mean, we're still learning or trying to learn. I mean, compared to corn, it seems like maybe we've had less success. I mean, soybeans almost a little more unpredictable. It seems like you throw some extra fertility at corn, there's a high percentage chance that you're going to see something out of it. Soybeans, that's not necessarily the case. You might see something. It might be all foliar growth, and it's a fine line there to your timing and what products you're putting out. I mean, we are still trying to figure out how to consistently get 100 plus bushel soybeans, because it's not an every year thing do we go out and even come close some years to weighing even a strip at 100 bushels. So we're still developing programs, testing every year, multiple applications of stuff. If we have time on the farm, I mean, that's going to be varied by weather, but on the years that we can, make applications and test things from, varieties. And like I said, these guys had from mid group 4s to late group 4s, limited acres, that we tried to push the envelope by maturity. We've did, mid group 2s before that. Through testing some of that, we figured out there for a period that, we needed to get in the more early group 3s, because the group 2s, when it ultimately got to a high yielding year, just wasn't keeping up with the group 3s. So, I mean, we're changing constantly on soybeans and the management, and continue to look to change and what's going to add more value and return on investment every year for the next year.
Would you ever raise a soybean crop without that R3 application?
I would not.
No, never.
Not even if 2012 would probably come around again.
No, and I think back to 2018, when this all kind of started, things started clicking. We had already prepaid for fungicide on every acre of bean that year. And in August, beans got down to $8. And a lot of guys started crunching numbers and pulled out their fungicide pass. And there was a big variance in yields across the county. And I think it could be tied back to fungicide that year, because there was when we had
frog eye come in.
And we had really good success with beans that year, but we were protected from frog eye. We were kind of on that fence in August, like, well, or end of July, do we make this pass or not? And we kind of said, it's already paid for. Let's just go ahead and keep doing what we're doing.
Well, and that's the year where, we always have some side-by-sides, usually a fungicide or a guy splits a field. And I mean, that was the year when frog eye came in bad enough. And we haven't seen it that bad since, but I mean, we was talking some 10 to
20.
almost, I was going to say 15 bushel differences with and without that pass. Hey, even at $8 beans, that can pay for that pass for several times.
I think that proved it for us. Like, this is real, and we don't want to go away from it.
I mean, there were several guys even that year, don't pay. Oh crap, it paid.
You're not going to have that every year, but we'd studied it long enough on our farm anyways that it's just a staple application now. It's just penciled in every year, and we do it. And And with all of these things on any crop we're growing and things we're trying, it's all tracked. And even these later maturity beans we tried this year, we knew what our break even was before the combine hit the field. We knew what we had to attain to know whether this is going to be something we're going to look at for years to come, or if we've got way too much money in these beans. And everything we've done, we've still made money. That's what we're doing. And I think every farm needs to do that. You need to know where your break even is. You need to know whether it's worth it or not. And every farm is different. Everybody's expenses are different. And you just have to adjust to what works for you, know what works for you, and keep studying.
So moving on from the R3 app, we're heading into harvest. So much like corn, you guys were starting to target those high 20s is where you're going to start harvest. So what are you targeting on soybeans? When are you going to start?
I'd love to be there when they're 14 to 15. That's where your best yield is. I mean, we've cut a lot of beans this year in the upper nines. I mean, that's a lot of money on the table lost before the company ever went across them. I mean, my high yield was cut at 13.3, 13.4. That's where ours was, and that's where the best yield was.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think ideally that 14.5 to 12.5 is where you want to be. It just seems like, everybody's cut beans before and they're beating off the windshield. They're not going in the head.
There's a lot of harvest loss in soybeans when they get too dry.
Yeah, there is. And no different than you put it in the bin and you air them too long. You can shrink them down in the bin, or you could swell them back out if you know how to manage that side of it right. We've typically tried 14.5 to 12.5. Seems to do very well, and they seem to keep very well. And even again, no different than corn. I think you take a 14% bean to the elevator, you're going to make more money than you take a 9% bean to the elevator. Even with all the dock the elevator is going to take, in the end of the day, you're going to come out ahead.
Are there any tips or tricks to try to get within that moisture zone of how you guys manage anything different to make sure that you can get there or try to get there as best as possible?
I think with the introduction of the draper head years ago, you can harvest earlier in the day and later at night and kind of capture some of that. And if you're using the auger head, it just kind of limits your harvest availability with a wetter bean. And it's no different than when fungicides first came on and you had auger heads. It was a struggle to harvest fungicided beans with an auger head versus a draper belt. I think that's helped out a lot. Having a big enough fan on your bin that you're putting it in, if you're going to try to dry it a little bit, you got to have enough to push the air through so you don't lose the bean in the bin as far as starting to rot or get hot on you.
That, and I think just a total varietal maturity spread to help manage that. If you're just going to go from, say, a 3.1 to 3.5, and that's where you're going to stop, you're going to have dry beans no matter what. Too dry of beans, no matter what you do, you're not going to get them all even above 11% moisture. You're going to be down there some 9% stuff every time.
And I think you have to build yourself up and get experience with the beans that still have leaves on them. They may look like they're 15% beans, and you're running through the combine, wow, those things are 11. So next year you need to go out a little bit sooner and get some experience to give yourself some confidence to know that those beans are ripe before they visually look like they're ripe.
All right, well, we really appreciate you guys coming in here and sharing some of this. I think it's good information for our listeners. There's a lot of guys that have hit yield plateaus on soybeans for a lot of years now, and everybody's asking the question, how do we break through? And hopefully some of the things you guys are doing and some of the experiences you guys have had will help with that a little bit. But we appreciate the conversation. I know I learned a lot. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. And thank you guys for listening.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.